All right. More smartness from Dr. Ramani, basically. So, I see the reason I use that term, in ways because that's like a see when they say the pedo-bang psycho or became a pedo-bang psycho, that is where I pretty much those are the people that I essentially they fall into that category basically. Most of the time, they do these. It's a Satan ritual, is what it is. And so apparently, she states, it's probably backed up by the science and stuff, that a psycho is born. So that means that they have like some sort of potential chromosomal or genetic issue. See, this is where like when they do this. Okay, so essentially, eugenics is is about like having a psychopath mother and a psychopath father, basically, and attempting to build genetics around probably around this idea. And so the pedobank psycho essentially is probably usually comes that whole Nazi kind of world, kind of does, is Satanist, basically. And so the pedobank psycho is probably somebody that is born of psychopaths, and that then they get built in Satanism into a sociopath. And so essentially, in the wizard ways, see, essentially, the English people have like it's not genetics project, but it's kind of like where in Britain, the English people end up being not psychopaths, a lot of them. And so then they kind of like the older world used to place people and stuff with wives and husbands and stuff, kind of like how the Hindus and Islamic people they used to do. Your prairie farm daughter and stuff would get placed with a man or something. Okay, so they always kind of had like an opposite idea. So potentially there's some sort of differences in the English people. Some might be this. I mean, it kind of sometimes, but the reality is that they're probably people that are genetic that have always been finding other people that aren't psychopaths. Basically, I mean, it's like everybody's like proper and nice. And I mean, that's how you're supposed to be. And so the whole idea is that people that would fall into this idea usually wouldn't have been favored for marriage anywhere, basically. And so with that comes Satanists that essentially find children. They find children of families that aren't psycho. Basically, I mean, they find both, but that's the whole idea is that they essentially attempt to take like probably completely unpsychotic people. They kind of know things sometimes about the families that they target for that shit. And so with that comes like where then they essentially build the child into a sociopath for like balance. See, it's like anti-psycho basically, and then they build the child in these kind of satanic, psychotic, sex slaving ways, and then the child starts kind of acting a little psycho-y, basically. But that then, like with me, when that happened to me as a child, essentially, I would just fucking refuse in all ways, even after they did this type of shit. I would see other kids being like this, like killing little infants and stuff, and I would literally sit there. No, that's how I was as a kid when they would try and force me to do that stuff. I said no, I ain't doing that. See, I would only do the prairie part, and then the other kids, they kind of turned crazy a little bit, okay? And so, but I didn't. And so that's probably has something to do with the fact that, like, you know, like my grandfather and stuff is like the nicest man you'll ever meet. My grandmother, the nicest, and this isn't being biased either, like the nicest people ever. And so that's kind of like where, you know, there's probably something to that. Just like there's something to this. See, this is the things that I know. That for every kind of idea like this, that then there's some sort of somebody being born as an anti-psycho. Anti-psycho is born also. But this is what I know about myself. You can't get me at all to be like that. At all. It's like I don't have a psycho bone in my body. See, I have vengeance, normal, logical vengeance aspects, okay? So, you know, but that the reality is that in lots of ways, I attempt to get people to not be like this. Basically, even though I kind of hate them. Basically, I attempt to get people to like not to do something different. I attempt to get people to do kind of like sure, I understand why those women want to watch those people. I understand, but see, that's the stuff I won't watch. That stuff, I won't feed my psyche with that kind of salacious kind of stuff because see, being somebody that's like anti-psycho is like where I know that if you engulf yourself with looking at that stuff and seeing those sick fucks get raped all around and stuff, see, that stuff slowly builds these women and shit, and these military guys, they fucking hate them so much. And see, I know that that's kind of like where their hatred and vengeance and shit, the hatred and vengeance they have, that sits in the back of their mind, and it starts to build some of this stuff. And that the whole idea is that essentially they get to a point where I won't really have much care for them, but I do attempt to explain to them all their dumbness. I do attempt to explain like what they're doing to their mind and shit. I try and get them to understand what will come of them from doing that stuff. Kind of like how a psychiatrist should do. But, you know, I can take one look at this woman. I could tell that if you ever showed her what they did to women, that she would probably pay money to watch those fucks get... And I won't. But I can tell. Oh yeah, I can tell. I can see. She's probably that kind of shit. I know exactly what that shit does. Even to smart, educated, logical, rational witches and shit. I know exactly what seeing that shit, what doing that to a woman will do to a woman like that. It'll build psycho or sociopathic. They'll have thoughts. That's a natural reaction, but that you got to be careful because you know what? After a while, it's like, you know, some of these women were able to watch that a long time ago, and then years have gone by where they may not realize that there's a different kind of sociopathicness, and it would be to be constantly obsessed about watching that kind of stuff. And see, good in, good out is kind of how you're supposed to approach that stuff. See, the whole idea is catharsis. Catharsis is a very powerful tool that these military guys utilize, but essentially they're just supposed to see their abuser getting punished. And then they probably shouldn't be feeding their brains like that anymore. I mean that you'll slowly turn into the L.A. witches. Those women are they get fucking see it's like a whole different kind of world where they like to manipulate people that do this kind of stuff, and then they do some things that pretty much borderline on like what a sociopath would do. Okay, and that you got to be careful. You don't want to turn yourself into that. And so then I noticed because this is stuff they bring up about all of these women. They attempt to associate this word with them. And you see that most of them, the reason that they fling their vagina around in a sexual way has a lot to do with self-esteem, basically. And so then, essentially, they don't really care about just being a sperm dumpster all the time. I mean, that's kind of it. They don't have pathos in their psyche, kind of. And that then, but when they fuck up, okay, so this is kind of where, like, sometimes they'll, like, help other women or something, and then all of a sudden they just get raped into a schizo. And so then they feel shame and guilt about that. They'll feel bad about that shit. The regular women that kind of have this issue a little bit, you know, the more that they do this open sex, constant sex hookup site stuff, they probably have this. When they go around cheating on their husband or boyfriend all the time, they probably have this. See, when they sit there in their second life, justifying what they're doing. And so the whole idea is that I wouldn't really label my ex-wife as that, but the whole idea is that at some point when she was having an affair, this stuff would have started to emerge in her second life, and she would have been justifying that stuff away and justifying it and stuff. And that then when she saw what happened to the wizard after the wizard found out, then like she'll blame herself so much for all the hardship in my life, and see, the wizard was noticing narcissism was building in her. It went away. And then she started having empathy. But then, with that, the shame and the guilt then starts to build the other side of that, which is like suicidal ideations and shit. Okay? So then, the wizard goes, all right, witch, here's some love stuff. Here's some love stuff. And then this is what I always know about a witch. If they have this, and if they start having that about the wizard about it, then that's right, darling. You know I forgave you a long time ago. But that doesn't change the psychological repercussions of that, the trust. It's like the broken trust and love and all that stuff. That stuff takes years to mend a wizard's heart, basically. And so that's where I know, that's where the more she probably was thinking that I just wanted her to die or something. That's where all I did was build stuff like, I'm still pissed at you, but I build things. I build things that she knows comes directly from my heart. All right? I do that. And I do that to prevent the suicidal ideations that come from some of the actions in her life. Right? And so, this is where I also know the witch, if she was given the right facetious feminism, like dark web world, that type of shit, I know that would cause witch to start thinking in these ways. And see, that's dangerous for a chick like her because she's already facetious and kind of sinister anyways. And see, she's just a feisty kind of feminist, but those women sometimes, if they don't if they're not mindful of their feistiness and their sinisterness, if they stumble upon the right world, kind of, then that sinister and feistiness stuff can start to turn in to potentials for weird sociopathic kind of stuff. It really can. It'll start feeding their brain and shit. And so, that's where you don't want to go down this road. But see, these people that I'm talking about, some of these cops and shit, my guess is they were probably born a psycho already, and that then the things that they do online and all that weird S&M Satanism stuff, that's the shit that those people build themselves up into the Cayman Pedobank psycho. And that I know what that is because those were the people that did this stuff to me as a child. People like this, the Cayman Pedobank psycho, okay? Just basically it's just basically what a Satanist is. That's what they look to achieve. I mean, it's just the person that wants to stab little infants in a weird ritualistic altar way and stuff, those a lot of times are Cayman Pedobank psychos, basically. And so, well, they always want to have a sex club account down in the Caymans or something like that. They do. So, that is where, see, these type of things, most of the time, these people, like I say, these people get to the point of being just like Thorazine people, the Thorazine people. They just, they twist their mind so much by doing this shit so much. It's so probably impossible to reverse some of the, it's kind of like I've built myself my whole life into being anti-psycho after these people did this shit to me as a kid, into being anti-psycho. I wouldn't do anything psycho at all. Basically. And that then, when I had my little boy, then I wouldn't be psycho at all. At all. At all. I would be his bitch. I would do whatever the fuck he wanted. I would be a nice mom and shit. Anything he fucking wanted. Everything, I would keep him from putting his hand on, the oven and shit. Yeah, he would get in trouble. He'd have to sit on the stairs. But see, I wouldn't spank. See, that's where I won't. I know. Women does. Yeah. Probably shouldn't piss her off. But I won't. I won't because I don't like to physically, it's kind of a slightly Buddhist idea, I guess, but I don't like to physically hurt his body. And see, that's where people used to physically hurt my body. And so I won't. That's what it is with boy. See, if he pisses off Winch, then that's his own problem. He probably shouldn't. She has a different approach. But this is kind of what it is that I use a more wizard's method where Witch doesn't like putting in the persistent 30 minutes of sitting on the stairs. She doesn't like to put in. See the constant crying for Witch. This shit just gets into her brain. Does. And so it causes her to have anxiety and shit. So I understand that. Okay. But see, I don't. I sit there and I'm you sit. Basically, that was my approach. And so, that's where years of me, doing everything for my wife and kid, I would do everything for them. Everything. Cook, clean. I would do everything that they would ask me to do. Pretty much. And so, that's where, maybe I probably took that. See, there's a man problem with that I knew about in ways. See, once you start being your woman's bitch all the time, then they start to they start to lose respect for you a little bit, and then they go out and they look for somebody that treats them like a bitch, like basically. And so that is where, you know, I just wanted to make smiles on everybody's face. But with that, I know that there's a psychological, sexual aspect. Sometimes like, no, witch, no. You know, that's the stuff that you have to be able to bear. These are the things that I think about and learn. It's like, you can be your woman's bitch, but then you gotta add in some penis mastering ideas or something, so that they still like view you as a man or something. Because if you give in too much to them, they lose some sort of sexual respect. So that is what I learned from that. But see, that's the whole idea, is that in this town, these people kept calling her a narcissistic sociopath. And I thought that was strange, because a narcissistic sociopath that has a baby, see, I remember how she would be with our baby. And that there's no way that she could have ever been a narcissistic sociopath, because I observed. See, I observed woman with child. And that, yeah, she, you know, she's kind of spoily a little bit, but that she was not like that. And see, a spoily that's a narcissist and a sociopath, they would have had to have a nanny. Honestly, they would have had to have a nanny, and then they would have never, you know, like once in a while taking care of the kid, but then here nanny, kind of like in Servant. See that woman, see how her sociopathicness was built through. And that's a fine example. See, she would have been this in ways in that TV show. It's a good example. And that then all the weird psychoness stuff would have kind of built her into a sociopath, for people stealing her kid, and her like seeing her child die and then having amnesia. And then in that TV show, she sits there being triggered all the fucking time. Being triggered all the fucking time. And that you're gonna see, I can see where this TV show's going, that she's gonna have like a full recall eventually. Then she's gonna freak out. Honestly, I bet you that's what's gonna happen. Eventually she's gonna realize that the baby that she thinks is her baby isn't. And that she's gonna realize that her real baby is dead. And that is the kind of shit that some of these women, that, you know, the death of the child stuff. See, if they go to these big blackmailing events, they see that stuff, some of them, and see, it's like, the more closer to the person that stabs the little infant and doing all the Satanism and stuff. See, the ones that don't do as much Satanism, they're further away from the event and they watch. That shit still fucks up their brain. And that's the kind of shit that essentially the people that are like not really doing much as Satanism at the blackmail event, they'll see, and then it will be a horrific thing for them, but they won't get the amnesias. See, the closer people get, the more likely they're like involved with the ritual. Those people start to get the amnesias of the event because it's so extreme. And so like tearing children's body limbs apart kind of stuff. Honestly. And now depending on what kind of person they are. See, that's the kind of stuff that I would never want to do even, I would never want to even be around those people, okay? This is why I like to offload all my super wizard genius stuff so that people can get to understand how to deal with, well, in my research, I basically research on how to fix, let me just show you the theoretics of this. This is what ends up kind of being the reality when it comes to therapy for these type of people, okay? Think about it like this. Satanism is misogyny, okay? So at its core, it's a bunch of males, and that they pretty much don't necessarily have much ability to really have the reversal of the psycho-y sociopathic issue. And then, usually the women, they have probably an ability to being, to having some sort of therapeutic, reparative therapy. These ones, you know, it's like here, pretty much you can, even the most Satanist, horrible women, somebody like me would literally have the ability of causing that woman to break down psychologically in a pathos way, and would be able to flood real emotions back into their psyche. Okay? See, a lot of these women that do that stuff think that those children won't ever remember. And then here I am, 40 years old, being the exact person, kind of person that they do that stuff to as little boys. And then here I am remembering every single aspect to it in all ways. And then a lot of times they do that stuff because they don't think that the child will ever remember. And then that's essentially where it's, you know, it's been such a horrible thing. That's essentially everything that they everything that they did to me, I had to literally myself prevent myself from being a sociopath, okay? Myself. See, like when these cops, I've heard what they say, you know, I've heard of it. These children that they do that stuff to have a tendency to turn in to that as adults. But see, I know where it comes from. They get lured into a satanic S&M or weird sex world stuff. And so that's where I always avoided. And that, see, these witches, somebody like me, they would want growing up, and since they're all weird sex freaks, a lot of what they do to the little boys is they train them to be like the dudes that are in satanic S&M. And that then when they get older, those are they all do weird sex stuff like that. And that, then it's like somebody like me ends up being like perfect, basically. I don't do anything bad, okay? And that then it's what they realize is that everything they tried to do with me as a child, pretty much I've avoided in every way. All the reasonings. See, all these people that do that stuff to children, essentially later on in life want them to be in satanic S&M doing weird swinger, cuckolding, weird shit like that. And so the whole idea is that all those people, they usually turn into crazy people. They do. They turn into people that do horrible things to women. They turn into people that do horrible things to children. They turn into people who just love to sit around all day at their job being a crazy person on their computer and shit. And see that literally the method is just to not do any of that stuff. And see, their whole thought would be to get somebody like me to be doing that stuff. But then the fact that I remember everything, that is where they start to feel bad because they know that the wizard is supposed to be like me. And that the only way to do that is to do basically the opposite of what those witches would have wanted. I mean, that's in lots of ways, that's what it is in lots of ways. And then just like the reality of like what it's done in my life, what Satanism has done around me in my life. See, that's the shit. All of a sudden, you can start to rebuild women. Like when they find out that I just am monogamous and that I just don't have any desire to do anything in weird sex ways and shit. That is where they start to realize to force somebody or to like be manipulating somebody constantly into doing that stuff who just hates it so much and remembers all the victimization and shit. That's where usually women, see, they have vagina brains. It's kind of it. See, they have estrogen, and then that stuff kind of affects that stuff. See, in ways, they have a primal motherly instinct in their brain, and that is pathos, and that is where, pretty much, that's kind of like where these people, especially these ones, the testosterone stuff works in two ways. See, one's like the Jew bald way, and that then these dudes will always have hair. It's like, you know how like the Jewish people actually have like have testosterone head. It's part of their world, kind of, and that then these dudes always have hair, and then they have a high amount of testosterone also, and so that's kind of where there's two sides to the testosterone stuff, and then basically women just you can pretty much. A lot of these women are like, they do things to make them womany, and that probably has a pituitary like effect on what they're doing all of the time in their life. So then they're probably flowing with estrogen all the time, basically, and so that is where the estrogen itself at high doses has a tendency to build emotions. So that could be a potential to be giving them estrogen therapies. Potentially. That might be something that might reverse them. But see, they'll be so fucking misogynist. Like, they'll fucking hate that idea so much. These dudes that do that misogyny shit, they would fucking hate that shit so much. The fact that, you know, they would hate it, okay? They just would. Like, then there's somebody like my dad who's a man, and like he just had cancer, so he had to get like some estrogen therapy or something. And he was like just joking about how he's gonna need to buy a bra and shit like that, and he was wondering if he was gonna have a period and shit. And it's a joke. And see, he didn't give a fuck, because he's a man. He didn't give a fuck. See, he's a man. He's a man that fucks witch in the past. But that is where, you know, he never did any of this stuff, this S&M shit either. He didn't. And that he just went to work and then came home and was being a man and a family man. But see, that might be something. And then some of these women might have like way too much estrogen in their, because they do things that like optimize primal estrogen and testosterone boost kind of stuff. inside of satanic S&M. They do things. So some of these women potentially might benefit from like some herbal testosterone kind of stuff. Potentially stuff that would boost that type of stuff. That might be helpful for them because they have a tendency to be cold-hearted or ultimate too emotional. That's what happens in the witches. See, it's probably because it's just like, it's either do what mom says or I'm so upset. Basically, I mean that's kind of what it is. It's like they're like that. It's like your mom, you know. It's like if you ever, you know, life, you know, they like get mad because you're not picking up your room or something, and like then they like overtly emotional or something, and it's like that's a natural aspect to women, and then that's like where potentially these women will have like extreme versions of that because they're used to like have these people, they fuck a kid. Here's what happens: they fuck a kid, and then the women can't be womeny. They have to like be their master. Then they have to strap on a dildo, and then they have to like rape them in the satanic acid way. And so then it turns them into like dominant, and that then essentially they're always trying to be super womany and submissive all the time. So that kind of stuff, that's where you gotta break through that stuff. See, it's how easy it is. It's how easy it is. If you get them dominant, then you have to do things to make them have emotions while being dom. And then, if they're like being submissive, then you have to do things to pull away emotions, basically. And so then it'll probably have like a reparative therapy to what becomes a very extreme emotional switch. And then there's some that'll just be this block. Then there's some that'll just be that block. And that the ones that are just this block are the ones that pretty much get told what to do in every single way and have a high probability of being a blackmailed and forced sex slave. And so the reparative therapy for them is to build somewhat of not to build dominance in them. It's meant to build, you're supposed to eliminate the fear and to build defiance to mastering is the approach with those type of women. But that, yeah, these dudes, potentially estrogen and Thorazine. I mean, it might have a real effect on some of these people that really get, I call them clubbers. Some of them might benefit from, because see, they probably are like, okay, so they have this term called serotonin syndrome that basically depletes your brain or whatever of serotonin, kind of. It just like drains your whole brain of it. Potentially, there's a similar theoretical idea. These people are usually roiding and doing testosterone in all the time, and that it might have such an effect on their pituitary aspects that it might deplete in lots of ways. It might deplete their brain of estrogen too much, and then pure testosterone is like a pure animal primal kind of stuff. And then that's kind of where then that's kill and fight, and then that's where this type of stuff and what they do online and shit, that's where that starts to build. And then potentially with some small amounts of like, they won't eat food that has potential for like building. You know how like you can get a pregnant woman and then there's like food list on estrogen building kind of stuff. They have one for testosterone where they damn well won't eat anything that's on the estrogen list. It's like soybeans. They won't, because it like potentially raises the estrogen in your body. And they might have like a testosterone syndrome or like the serotonin shock. You might have that in like a testosterone way. And these women, they might have that in like an estrogen way. And so that kind of stuff, when it comes to the chemical balancing stuff, see, the SSRI, see, they rape each other into like a brain scrambling rape. That stuff is like a serotonin shock. So my thoughts, I have yet to really see anybody that falls in this theoretical category actually ever benefiting from SSRIs. Keep that in mind, because a lot of these people take that stuff and that they're still crazy because they like get money in their S&M for everybody takes the pills and shit. I mean, they do. And so essentially that type of stuff might be an issue with them also. Like the SSRIs, every one of these, while actively doing S&M and being sociopaths, are all taking those probably. And so my thought is that it's probably not beneficial to what they do to their psyches when they gaslight each other down and they rape each other into brain scrambles and shit. And it's like in porn, okay? So if you look in porn, sometimes you'll see these women and their eyes will roll back and stuff. That is where they had received a brain scramble. There's like a cross switch happening in their brain, makes their eyes roll back real fast, and then they go back and there's a cross switch in their brain from a traumatic rape shock. That's what happens to them. And so these are some of my thoughts when it comes to these words. This lady, I view her as smart. She's smart, but I learned something. See, I didn't necessarily know this. It's not really, I don't really delve into that part of it, okay? Into the genetic aspects. That is where I do medical mind, and that this is science. So when it comes to this word, this is a medical mind. And so my research operates around the medical psychology aspects. This type of information is like a scientific, it's a different block. It's a different intellectual block, okay?